We did it. All right, Kateline.
Howdy, Holt heads. Kateline here, and alongside me, my co-host.
Oh God, what do you say? I can't think of it.
It's your girl?
Oh, it's your girl, Kateline. Nailed it.
Yeah, but say it as you.
Oh, howdy, Holt. Oh, wait.
Howdy, Holt heads. Kateline here, and alongside me, my co-host.
It's your boy, Kurt Money. Oh, it doesn't sound as good.
I'm Lester Holt.
Well, let's get into this thing. This was a full-on episode, okay? This was a return to form in the best way. Oh, wait, first, IMDb. I'm like so excited to talk about the stuff in the app, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, here's the description. The real killer of Idaho teen Angie Dodge is caught after 20 years. Chris Tapp, the man wrongly convicted in the case, sees a shocking turn. Pretty good. I mean, I feel any description of this story has to have a shout out to Carol Dodge. Somewhere in there.
Yep.
Because she's a goddamn all-star.
She is one of the biggest all-stars in the history of Dateline.
Absolutely. Now, what did you think? So obviously you're on board with Carol. What'd you think of this episode? Hit me with your thoughts.
I saw it back in the day, and I remembered Carol. How could you forget?
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen this. I've never heard of this case. This is all... Chris's face kind of looked familiar to me, but this was all brand new to me. Brand new.
Well, the ending was new to me.
Which we'll save in that f***ing ending. I like... Talking Dateline had some good stuff, too, because in it, J. Mank is saying, like, but they got him... He's free too early. Like, what else is going to happen in this episode? What else could possibly happen in the last 10 minutes? And then it did happen.
Yep.
But anyway, our story begins June 13th, 1996 in Idaho Falls, Idaho.
Kurt,
Yeah.
What is going on in Idaho?
Yeah. I mean, they even say so in the episode. They're like...
Long before the state of Idaho was associated with notorious names like Lori Vallow or Chad Daybell or Brian Koberger.
Like, they just got some real kooks active out there.
And the last episode was Idaho, wasn't it?
Yes, I think it was. Yeah, Idaho's got some weirdos. Up to no good. Now, they also have apparently some fun lazy rivers. And that's where the cops went for the suspect pool.
But here at the river is where it first went wrong.
18-year-old college student Angie Dodge doesn't show up for work one day and people are worried. They go to her apartment to see what's up. Uh-oh, she's dead. On the floor, blood everywhere.
What did you see inside that apartment?
What appeared to be, unfortunately, a murdered young lady.
Nearly decapitated.
The cops' first thought is to look at her friends. And now they were all these kids that hung out at the river, which Keith loved to paint a picture.
The River Kids.
The River Kids. How about it?
Among those river kids, Angie Dodge was a force.
I think they were trying to make it seem like these kids were kind of, you know, the bad kids at school or the kids that were kind of up to no good.
A daily gathering of the ones who didn't quite fit anywhere else.
But they were all relatively good kids. I mean, they didn't have rap sheets.
Yeah.
They weren't making trouble. It was just a place they could go down by the river and hang out.
Yeah, and we talked to 3 or 4 of these other river kids. I kind of liked them all. They seemed like good people.
Did you like Jer?
I did. I actually liked Jer a lot.
Like Jeremy Sargis, known as Jer.
And Jer brought me, I'm not going to say tears, but the eyes were welling, Kate, in this episode.
Wow.
Because of Jer.
Short for Jeremy, of course.
Yeah.
Very creative nickname.
Yeah. Oh, you know, speaking of names, I've been thinking that I need to call a moratorium on talking about people's names on this show.
Now, Tori is a guy. Weird for us because we both know 2 Tories that are ladies.
But then we watched this episode and we've got a Tap and a Drips, and I can't help but talk about it. So here we are again. How about these names?
A lot of good names.
A lot of good names.
Dodge, Tap, Drips,
Yeah.
Jer.
Jer.
I thought she was going to put me in the river.
Okay, so they're interviewing these river kids. Now, one of them, Christopher Tapp, is a 20-year-old. They talked to him a few times.
Tapp said he would like to help, but he said he didn't know anything about Angie's murder.
And this is where it all starts for Chris Tapp, is because he keeps going back to these cops. Now, they tried to talk to the other river kids, and at one point, Chris Tapp accuses Jer of being in the murder.
I remember waking up on my birthday. The police were there to arrest me for accessory to the murder of Angie Dodge.
For some reason, these detectives, which are a pair of dinguses, if there ever were. They zero in on these river kids, convinced that her really good friends and buddies would just rape her and murder her. So they bring in Chris, and they just, it's an age-old story of coercion. They basically break him down until he confesses to this murder, which he didn't do. But they just keep planting things in his head and manipulating him and making it so that he can say exactly what they want to hear.
Yeah.
A total of 20 hours of questions. They polygraphed him repeatedly. And eventually it came out. A confession of sorts.
And they think they've got their guy, but they also think the other river kids are probably in on it too. So they're convinced that Jer had something to do with it, and then they kind of make it so Chris will finger Jer also, even though he knows he didn't have anything to do with it too.
How'd you feel about your old friend Chris Tapp?
Oh, I hated him. What the hell are you thinking, man?
And it's just a mess. It just gets worse and worse and worse until Chris is arrested.
He goes back 9 times. He's interviewed by police.
9 times.
They pull out all the hits of that, like, let's just play a mind game. If you did do it, what would you have done next?
Theoretically.
Hypothetically, if Chris Tapp was holding on to Angie and she was being cut, but I didn't, would you listen? I'm sorry.
And they're also doing a thing, we find out later, is they're saying, hey, dude, don't worry about it. We got your back. You'll get immunity or something. You'll just get, like, aggravated assault assisting of. No big thing.
He would get the benefit of an immunity deal.
Why would he get that idea?
Because that's what the law enforcement officers told them. It was all a ruse.
This is an epic case of the cops doing every single move wrong. And this is the first one we're going to highlight, but it ain't the end. Mm-hmm. Because this detective in there, Dingus number 1.
There was well over 14 different wounds. It was that horrific.
He knows Chris personally. He's like, you trust me, right? Because he was like a counselor to him at his school.
It was worse than that. He was, what's the term? We had one at my high school too.
Then Detective Jared Furman had been a school resource officer well known to a young Chris Tapp.
But as soon as they said that, I was like, oh, I know this guy. He sucks.
Yeah.
His name was Ken Brown, is that right?
No, Furman.
Or was that one of the detectives?
It's Ken Brown and Furman, that's correct. Ken Brown is still alive and retired and won't talk.
Ken Brown, who's retired, did not respond to our questions about Chris Tapp's exoneration or about the failure to collect Drip's DNA.
Now, Furman here, who I think is guilty of a number of crimes, he got his eventually. He's not here today.
Died from Alzheimer's.
But he's in there saying, you can trust me, tell me this and that. Now, each interview, Chris is giving new information, taking back old information. It's like his story is never the same. It's always instigated by the police. For instance, they say like, well, Chris knew about the clothing. They proved that they showed photos of the clothing to Chris before they asked him the questions. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's like these guys were dead set on pinning it on this Chris. When Chris should, instead of accusing old Jer of being a co-conspirator, he should have followed Jer's steps. Because what did Jer do but get a lawyer? And the lawyer said, you don't talk to anybody without me. Done. He's out of jail in 2 days. That's it.
But it turned out that Jeremy had something going for him that Chris Tapp did not. An aggressive attorney.
Chris Tapp could have had the same outcome as Jeremy. Instead of 20 years in prison. The cops were suspicious, but he said no more, and they wouldn't have any evidence. Because how would they have possibly connected him to that without the confession? You can't do it.
There was no evidence.
Yeah.
None whatsoever.
So, this is just a classic example of shut your mouth, get a lawyer, because the cops are never on your side. Ever, ever, ever. And they talk about that on the Talking Dateline about how a false confession is the hardest thing to undo. Because they even do a study where in cases where they say that the confession was false, 80% of the time they're still convicted. That's alarming.
It is.
Even in cases involving confessions which were later proven to be false, juries convict in 73 to 81% of the cases.
Did you catch when Ken Brown messed up and said that Angie's murder was a passion of crime instead of a crime of passion?
No!
What a dumbass.
I didn't. Oh my God, that's going in, and I'm turning it up. That's good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it was a passionate crime. It was somebody who wanted her.
Passionate crime.
But also, props to Keith, because he came after those cops and was like, yeah, you were definitely telling him the answers to the questions before you asked them, and put some stuff in his head, and that was coercion.
Is it possible, at least, that there was some suggestion involved in these things before he actually said them? That he heard in the questions he was being asked some hint of what the answer might be?
And they were like, we disagree, politely.
Yeah, that was like in 2010 or 12 or something. Like, Keith has talked to a lot of people on this throughout, and at some point they were on Dateline defending it, saying this shit of like, we respectfully disagree with Chris Tapp's assessment of what happened that night. Blah, 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 blah.
No, we would politely disagree with that.
We followed protocol to the letter.
Yeah.
You can see it in our tapes. And Keith is like, well, you can see something in those tapes.
For two guys who interviewed this person, found that in the first interview, the second interview, the third interview, the fourth interview, the fifth interview, he lied like a sidewalk. Then you finally get to the seventh interview, and that's the gospel truth.
Well, absolutely not.
And also because they act like, well, he confessed, so what else is there? And Keith, like you're saying, forces them to admit people confess falsely. Like, this is a proven thing, guys.
You can't. The worrying thing, though, well, you can't. People do confess to things they didn't do.
The cops work up this immunity deal with him where they say, like, if you tell us the truth, then we'll only get you with like aggravated assault or whatever. But when they get the first DNA test back, they talk about the state of Angie's body and stuff. So they did find some DNA on Angie. And when the DNA tests come back, this is after Chris has already said, yeah, I did it, after 5 or 6 interrogations. So the cops are going, all right, we got this deal for you, but you have to tell us the truth. That DNA comes back, not him or Hobbs, the other guy that he accused. It's not either of them. Now, this is where it gets weird because the prosecutors were pissed that he lied in his immunity deal because the immunity deal said that he did it, right? Mm-hmm. So they refused to honor it. But then in 98, he's convicted of murder. So how were they allowed to then use it? I feel like if we unravel any bit of thread in this investigation, it's embarrassment across the board.
Yeah. So
Carol Dodge, she's told by the police that Chris Tapp killed her daughter. And she's saying, like, they tell me, Carol, he confessed. So I thought that he did it. But then the years start to pass and something ain't sitting right with Carol. She requests the tapes.
And she gets a hold of those tapes. And she immediately sees that he was coerced into confessing.
There's times that I wanted to put my fist through the TV.
And she's gonna do whatever she can to get him exonerated. And she's also hitting the pavement trying to find new leads about what happened to Angie. So she's out there putting 60,000 miles on her car, handing out flyers.
Angie's mom, Carol, was living in her own personal hell.
One funny thing was when she was like, yeah, I even went to some rough neighborhoods and someone told me you need to leave before someone hurts you.
And yet she kept doing it for years, taking incredible risks.
And I'm thinking, damn, those mean streets of Idaho Falls.
Yeah.
So, I looked into it, and at the time of the murder, Idaho Falls had a population of like 43,000 people. 60% of them were Mormon. I am not buying it for a second.
Wait, Carol Dodge said somebody pulled a gun on her.
I had a gun put to my head one night.
You don't think that happened either?
No. No. I mean, unless it was like a Mormon compound and they're taking up arms.
Yeah.
If it's like a Ruby Ridge situation. Yeah, I don't.
That's really funny.
It's a very safe city.
Well,
those Mormon gangsters.
Wow, that does paint a whole new light. Because she even says, I hit the streets, Kate. And then she says, I hit the streets.
Uh-huh.
That's when I went to the streets.
Yeah, so not only is she talking to the street toughs, she's getting her hands dirty on the streets. She's going to the cops every day, which I respect. I don't think I'd be able to do it because the cringe.
And they hated her.
Yeah, because she would say, I just walk right into his office.
And she was probably telling him, Chris is innocent. Chris is innocent. You need to find who killed my daughter. And they're like, Carol, he's locked up right now. And she's like, nope.
All they kept saying is, he confessed, Carol. He confessed. And I was extremely angry.
Poor Carol. She was crying the whole episode.
Yeah.
The only time we saw her smile was for a quick second during one of the final court hearings for Chris.
Yeah.
You see a flash of a smile while she's talking to someone sitting next to her, but the rest of the time, just crying. She's been crying for 20 years.
Yeah. And this has been her mission since then. So you hear family members of victims talk about how, like, the pain never ends. Carol Dodge is living proof of that. Because you're right, is on her face at every turn.
How did they do this to me? How have they managed to convince and keep someone in prison for all these years?
Now, somewhere around 2013, there's two things happening. Chris Tapp and lawyers are reaching out to, like, the Idaho Innocence Project and getting that ball rolling. Of like, hey, look at this interrogation tape. Hey, this is bullshit. They only let us read 4 of the 7 transcripts of the polygraph. Like, all this crazy shit. That's happening on Chris Tapp's side. Now, over on Carol Dodge's side, she reaches out on her own to, like, a professor of false confessions at some college in Colorado or something.
Who actually knew who she was because he'd seen Dateline. So he couldn't believe it when he got that call from her.
I had seen the Dateline show, so I was aware of who Carol Dodge was.
When she first called him, he was like, oh God, the victim's mother's calling. She's probably going to cuss me out.
It is extremely unusual that a victim's family member would reach out to me.
And instead she called up and was like, Chris Tapp didn't do it. Let's get him out of there. Carol Dodge. Oh,
badass.
Star!
Badass.
I wanted to put my fist through the TV.
So all the while, like, all of Chris's appeals are getting turned down. He's still fighting it. Oh, you know what? Okay, Furman, one of the lead detectives, who's the reason why all this happened in the first place. He eventually, during all this time where they're trying to prove that Tapp is innocent, he's coasting off of this arrest of Tapp, and he becomes mayor of Idaho. Or are you mayor of a city? I don't know.
Idaho Falls.
There we go. He becomes mayor of Idaho Falls. So now he's, like, kind of untouchable. So that's what he's doing. He's on top at that point, okay? He's over there posing with his fam.
Failing up.
And the detective who'd put him behind bars was now more powerful than ever, was mayor of Idaho Falls, and absolutely certain that Chris Tapp was as guilty as sin.
All right, but now is when the genealogy stuff starts to get cooking and the tide starts to turn. So it's the mid-2010s, and somebody reads, oh my God, it was Carol Dodge, of course. Like, I'm telling you, at every point in the story when something new happens, it's because Carol Dodge was there poking the bear and going, come on.
But then, guess who? Carol Dodge, Angie's mom, intervened again.
Because she's the one that reaches out to this lady. Cece Moore, I believe her name is. Now, she is the one, there's a few people doing the genealogy thing. I think she's the Golden State Killer one, though, correct? Like, she's the famous one.
Right.
But this was 5 years before that happened. Like, this is like 2013. People don't really know about familial DNA and all this stuff. This is all kind of brand new. She takes a look at the case and says, it's not a good candidate. Like, Keith says, like, you turned it down. And she's like, well, it didn't fit the parameters that I need.
My first assessment of this case was that it was not viable for investigative genetic genealogy.
And then Carol Dodge does, that's not good enough for Carol Dodge. What's she do? She goes to Cece Moore with pictures of the crime scene and says, look at the blood on this teddy bear. Look at the blood on the wall.
It made me just ill and very, very, very angry seeing what had been done to Angie.
And that's when Cece Moore says, boom, I'm in. Let's find out who did this. So now she's on the case.
Doesn't she use the pubic hairs?
Yes, the pubic hairs. The pubic hairs that they said, this was another sticking point for Carol Dodge, is that they said that the pubic hair did not, or maybe did not, belong to the killer? Or how'd they word it? It was
something confusing, and she was like, either they did or they didn't.
He goes, well, they're either hers or they're not.
Just as you thought.
He said, well, where are the hairs?
And they found these pubic hairs in an envelope in the evidence locker and sent them to the genealogy lady.
Oh, yeah. God, you're right. It was sitting in an envelope in storage.
Mm-hmm.
So she's like, hey, do you guys still have that pube? Oh, you do? All right, let's get it tested and stuff. So they do more testing because more time has passed and they can figure out more stuff. And Chris is cleared. That is not his pube definitively.
He didn't do it. No matter what the police thought, he wasn't even there.
So this gets us to 2017, where they say, time served, you can get out of here. Just say you did it and get out of here. Now, I don't remember if Dateline said this. I read an article afterwards that was they agreed to drop one of the charges because then it would lower his time served needed. So he was going to say he committed the rape, but not the murder. And then who butted in and said, Carol Dodge said, no, because then you'll be on the sex offenders registry or whatever. So if you got to admit something, say you killed her, but you didn't rape her. Like, that's the victim's mother telling him to do this.
She actually, I think, went way beyond what anybody even knows what she did.
So that's what gets him out, is that he had to serve a minimum of 30, but because they took off one of the charges, he had served 21 years. So they let him out, but he's still a convicted felon in 2017.
Yep.
So when he gets out, I liked how, I got to give a shout out to the production of this episode for finding that investigation footage of the day of the murder at the crime scene. I mean, how pumped were they when the cop that the camera's on is also now the lead detective and pretty charismatic and a guy that Kurt thought was pretty cool, right?
Yeah, he also thinks he's cool, though.
Yeah, but it's in like a... Okay, continue. You think he's full of himself?
Who do you think he looks like?
I don't know. I don't have anything specific. I just love... I kept trying to think of what his voice is. He says stuff like, we're going to go solve a murder. We're going to solve a 25-year-old murder.
We're going to go solve a murder. We're going to go solve a 25-year-old murder.
I loved it. I loved his voice. I loved his attitude. And I thought he was honest about stuff. You seem hesitant.
He looks like Kurt Russell mixed with Josh Brolin.
Yes!
With the energy of Cody from that polygamy show.
Oh, I don't know that. I thought you were going to say Cody from Step by Step.
Hey, the chick yet that's been able to resist my personal magnetism.
Which I think also applies here.
No, Cody from Sister Wives.
Yeah, I don't know it.
Come on.
I know the show, but I don't know Cody or anything. Oh, wait, is he the lead guy?
Yeah.
I do know. And now I get it. And I'm caught up. Kate, you're right. That formula does equal this dude.
We're going to go solve a murder.
But I liked him. You weren't crazy about him now.
No, I liked him. I liked him because he solved it.
Yeah. So cool when they... And also, they didn't even mention it, but when they show the footage of him as a rookie cop, and he was told to take note of everybody who comes inside and outside of the crime scene.
It was the morning of June 13th, 1996. Bill Squires was a rookie cop.
So not only do they have footage of this rookie cop standing there looking cool, but the guy next to him is another detective that we talk to later when we find out who it really is. That guy was also in that footage. Which I guess is not really fun in pod form, but I'm glad that I shared it with you, Kate. So Cece Moore is doing her genealogy thing. Like she goes away for a while and comes back and says, hey, I think it's in this Unsree family. So they start trying to knock those off the list.
Cece Moore began to come up with some answers, all connected to a family with the name of Unsree.
So one of the 6 guys who did live in Idaho Falls and may have had some accusations in the past about assault, they come up with a ploy where they pull him over and say, hey, we got a new cop here. Is it cool if he gives you the breathalyzer just so we can test it out?
The officer pulled him over, and so why they had the subject stop, they asked him, hey, this officer's in training, would you mind giving us a breath sample just so he can get the practice of running this machine?
The guy says, sure, go for it. That's pretty slick. Do you like that move?
I would not agree to that.
Hell no.
I would not in a million years agree to that. Because I don't know what they're going to do, what they're going to accuse me of. All of a sudden, they're making up stuff, and I'm getting a DUI for no reason.
Yeah, you're right. That's a great point. Especially if I'm confident, that there's no booze in my system. I think I'd be an asshole about it. You're right. Because what are they going to use it for?
My husband has a theory that if you're a dick to cops, they leave you alone. If you cooperate and you want to be friendly and nice, that's when they get you.
Because they know that they can, or they know they got the upper hand and whatnot, or what?
I don't know. His brother's a cop, so I guess he just knows how they think.
Everybody loves Raymond.
That feels like good advice. I don't know. When I'm around a cop, if I get pulled over or something, I get very, very... I'm sorry. I'm like a little punk. You know what I mean? Very apologetic.
Hello, sir.
I don't think I'd be able to be a dick to them.
How are you today, sir?
Yeah. A lot of that. Okay, so it's not him.
But when the results came back from the lab, no match.
Whoa.
That one, huge disappointment. That one hit us hard.
Now, this is yet another chapter in the discovery process of this case, because Cece Moore discovers good old small town action. She finds out that one of the sons had a son or something. There's one Unsree out there that she didn't know about. And she finds this out because she goes to a library in a small town and starts reading obituaries. Straight up, just reading old-ass obituaries. Isn't that crazy?
Some sweet librarian agreed to go through their archives.
And she finds this obituary that mentions that this guy had passed away and had left behind an adopted kid.
Right, yeah.
And she's
Who
like...
took his father's name.
She's like, boom, boom.
Boom. Cece Moore talks about it where she's like, it took all my strength to not burst in there, which made me think of that one time where the scientist did burst in there. Remember?
I do remember. Drove over there, burst in, results in hand.
And the door burst open. It's Kelly and her whole team of DNA analysts.
Yep. Cece Moore said, no, I'm too professional for that. I'm going to be chill about it. So she makes the calls and everybody's fucking stoked. We get a name of this guy and it's Brian Drips Jr. So this is the guy. They got to get this guy's DNA. And now they do stuff that Kurt Money eats up with a giant spoon, is camping out, staking out people, getting their DNA. I love it.
And after days and nights of surveillance, they watched Brian Drips flick a cigarette butt from his car.
It's always a cigarette. It's sometimes a cup. It's almost always a cigarette, and I love it. Because I love the irony that smoking will kill you, and it's also dumb for a lot of other reasons. Like, it gets you caught very, very easily.
When he called me, he said, I just got a call from the lab. It's him. Those are the words.
So they brought him in for an interview, right?
And he was more than happy to accommodate. He comes in, he's all confident. He's like, well, the only thing I can remember happening in Idaho Falls was that murder, so I'm guessing this has something to do with that. Because he wasn't living in Idaho Falls anymore.
Right. Yeah, he does bring that up without prompting.
He brings it up.
Yeah. He thinks he's being slick.
He claimed he didn't know a thing, except for what he'd seen watching Dateline.
So in between cigarette breaks, they break it to him that they got his DNA at the scene. And old Brian Drips does the only good thing in his life. Is he says, yeah, you got me and I did it alone. Because even then, Kateline, aren't they suspicious that Chris Tapp must have done this with this Brian Drips guy? Right?
If you were trying to convince us that nobody else was there, how would you do that?
And we hear from Chris that he's just so relieved and thankful that Brian did the right thing and helped exonerate him.
Yeah, he's got a good toot about it. He's got a good toot about it.
He finally did what was the complete, total truth and said he acted alone and I had nothing to do with it.
And we learned that Brian lived right across the street from Angie. And he just was messed up that night on drugs and alcohol, and he went across the street to rape her. I don't know that he intended to kill her, but he decided to. And he talked about it pretty casually, like, I'm just gonna go in and do my thing and leave.
Yeah.
Pretty gross.
He does say, I did my thing. That's disgusting.
Yep.
That is disgusting.
However, and I did my thing and then I left.
He offers a confession. Hey, this was the true one in the title. This was it. This was the true confession.
True confession.
So now the state is dealing with the fact that, like, well, now we got to deal with this Chris Tapp situation. So in 2019, they bring everybody together like they had a prosecutor and everything. I guess you got to, like, go through all the steps, right? It had to go all the way up to a prosecutor saying, because we found the guy that did this, we know that Chris Tapp did not do it. In these 20 years.
The judge ruled to vacate all of his charges. He no longer has any kind of record. He's a free man, innocent of everything.
And is this when he gets the hug from Jer? Because that's when I cried, Kate. When the bros hugged it out.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm getting chills thinking about it.
The man who once said he hated Chris.
I cried. I did. He's still the same Chris. He just been through some rough stuff.
Yeah.
He had all of the River Kids. Yeah. All of the River Kids were there to support him with t-shirts on that said, we told you so.
Yeah, he's innocent. We told you so.
All of those white t-shirts walking into that courthouse was middle fingers in the air. We told you so.
So he's exonerated in 2019. Life is good. I'm sitting here in this Dateline app going, now this is what I call a Dateline. I can't wait to talk to old Kateline about how awesome this episode was and how it had a happy ending. Because Keith does an unbelievable job of unleashing this information too. Is that Chris started legislature that gets, like, wrongly convicted some money from the state. And he says, Keith goes, Chris settled for an apology and $11 million. That's good. That's good stuff.
That's good.
Chris settled it for an apology from City Hall and $11.7 million.
So Chris Tapp gets $11 million. He gets married. Like, this sounds like a happy ending. But it doesn't last long because Keith interviews him in his new house. Keith is like, and it turns out it was the last time he swore he'd never talk to me again. And it turned out to be true. They're doing slow-mo of Chris smiling, like in memoriam style slow-mo. And I'm sitting here going, Keith, the f*** are you setting up, bro? If you're going to tell me that this guy is dead right now, I'm going to lose it. And then he said that he's a Greek tragedy, and I knew we were f***ed.
But it doesn't end here. And this ending, well, it's more Greek tragedy.
So he gets divorced, and then during divorce proceedings, his wife dies in a car crash. So she's dead. Then all of a sudden, Chris Tapp goes to Vegas in October of 2023. And what happens there, Kateline?
He dies.
So what I had heard happened is that he was in his hotel room in Las Vegas, and he was walking through the suite and tripped and fell and hit his head on the coffee table.
Unclear if it is an accident or murder, but the situation is a little shady.
Yeah.
The Clark County Coroner's Office has since ruled Tapp's death a homicide as a result of blunt force trauma to the head.
I guess there were other people in his hotel room, and someone heard arguing that night, and if he had $11 million and was throwing around some money in Vegas, he may have got.
Actually, Kateline, I can tell you exactly what happened, because there's a guy in prison for it right now. Like, this must have happened right after they put the episode out, okay? Because I got all the answers. I know how he died. I know what they called the room they were doing cocaine in. Fun room. They called it the fun room. Okay, so Chris Tapp is in Vegas. He's at a party in a hotel room that's being held by a guy that's apparently a former wrestler and a failed Republican candidate for office named Daniel Rodimer. Does that name sound familiar to you? I don't know this joker.
No.
So a party that was described to have rumored an F1 driver and a lot of Instagram influencers. What F1 driver do you think was at this random party?
This was October in Vegas?
Yeah.
Oh, well, the F1 race was he there for the F1 race? It was in October.
Oh, maybe. Yeah, because they said he was there for a car show. I mean,
yeah, he was there for F1. Future Kateline here. I'm an idiot. The F1 race in Vegas in 2023 was November 18th, not in October when Chris was killed. Actually, the night he was killed, October 29th, there was another race happening in Mexico. So the F1 driver that was at the party was either like a reserve driver or retired. Or, since it was a Halloween party, maybe it was just a guy dressed like one. I don't know.
So there was this party, and in the bathroom is where the cocaine was. And that was what was called the fun room. Now, Mr. Rodimer had his daughter there, his teenage daughter, and was instructing everybody, do not give her coke or I will kill you. And supposedly, Chris offered her some cocaine. I mean, she's at this party. I don't know what this dad wanted her to do at this party, for one.
It's really good parenting.
Yeah. So this Rodimer guy catches wind and attacks Chris in the bathroom. And he pushes him down and he hits his head, and that's what caused the death. But he continued to beat the shit out of him. Like, he wailed on Chris in there. And now this is the part that's kind of crazy, is that the wrestler guy was dressed as Ken with the fur on and no shirt underneath. He was in a full-on Ken costume.
Oh, was it also a Halloween party?
October. I mean, that was like jokingly referred to as what every asshole in your life will be for Halloween that year or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, yeah, like it's kind of wrapped up. Like, this guy, like, he has to have a trial and stuff. But there are multiple witnesses that said it happened. Like,
wow, what a tragic ending.
Yeah, and then the producer was on Talking Dateline too, and he was saying that. So they reached out to Ken Brown. So that mayor detective, he got diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Okay, and a year after Chris Tapp's conviction is overturned, he dies.
And Jarrett Furman, the former mayor, died from Alzheimer's a year after Drips was sent to prison. He was 60 years old.
That means, God, I hope at least some part of that year he was cognizant enough to know how wrong he was and how he had ruined a man's life for 20 years. Do you think sometimes he'd come back to reality and go, oh, man, I was such a prick?
No.
You think he did that or no?
No, I don't.
Yeah, he probably didn't.
No.
But he's done so. Ken Brown, however, retired curmudgeonly. They reach out to him. He won't talk to him, but they ask him 3 questions. Okay? Any response to Chris's exoneration? Did he have anything to say about missing the guy across the street? And how do you respond to Destiny? There was a witness on the stand in the original trial, was a friend that said that she had overheard Chris admitting the murder at a party. Now, years and years later, she comes out to say that the cops coerced that out of me. They were feeding me info and all, like also classic cop moves.
I think the common expression they use on the street is my.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
And that was the only thing that he answered. And his answer was, she wrote about it in her diary a year later, and 7 years later, she did an interview where she told that same story. This was after, like, the guy, like, had been exonerated and was clearly not there at all. And, like, the people are still hanging on to it. Like, that's just how stubborn people are. Like, and actually, this speaks to the tragedy of the case is that this Drips guy lived across the street, did not have an alibi, and admitted to blacking out the night before. And just because he moved shortly thereafter, he was completely off the radar because the cops had tunnel vision and were only going after Chris Tapp and his friends.
River kids.
So, like, think about how many times they kept going back to Chris Tapp and saying, come in again, we need to talk to you again. Like, they could just reread page 1 of the case and go, oh yeah, there's a guy out there who doesn't have an alibi and he blacked out the night before. Can you believe they left that untouched?
It's some pretty bad police work, is what Jer said.
Oh, Jer was real funny about it, though. You remember what he said? It's so good. He goes,
maybe they didn't have enough Q-tips to do DNA to the neighbors or something. I don't know. Pretty bad police work.
Jer with the burn. And roasting him.
Boom. Roasted.
Oh, I like Jer. I thought his eyes were really close together, but he seemed like a good dude.
They were close together, and so are mine.
Yeah.
So I like it.
What? I don't think yours are close together, dog. I don't see that.
They are. They're very close together.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, look, as in any great episode of Dateline, there's going to be a billion things that I forgot to say, but I believe we're at lists.
Kate's unnamed list. Is it a small town, the kind of town where things just don't happen? No. Maybe.
I say we give a little shout out to that small town librarian.
She ruled.
She agreed to go through obituaries with her. So
yeah,
we'll give it like a halfie or something.
No military, no Florida, but Idaho is looking a lot like Florida these days.
Yeah, hey, there were multiple criers in this app, and Billy Squire, that was his name. Billy Squire was the name of that detective. With the goatee that looked like all those people that you said. He cried and was like, he acknowledged it. He was like, I feel like I'm going to cry, but. So he didn't. He avoided being on the list by that much.
He did not say, I'm sorry.
And, geez, I almost want to tear up. I'm trying to keep it calm and collected here.
What else?
I think that's it.
Sweet. Now it's time for Kurt's Kick-Ass List.
Kick-Ass list.
God damn, did I think Signs of a Struggle was going to get a shout out tonight. I really thought it.
Well, you got Passion of Crime instead.
I wouldn't say that's a sign of a struggle.
So, no signs of a struggle. Somebody did mention Dateline, and it came up in a great way.
Except for what he'd seen watching Dateline.
And last episode, you said the thing about how if Dateline gets mentioned, Dateline's going to put it in. And I just think you're so right. And, like, this is another classic example. But I love it. I say keep doing it, dudes. Keep doing it. But that's all. I believe that's all that's on my list. Oh, before we go, do you remember what the name of the street was that Angie Dodge was murdered on?
No.
It was called I Street.
I Street.
As in the letter I and then street.
The neighborhood here on I Street in Idaho Falls.
How is that legal? I mean, is it an L? Is it a 1? Is it an I? Like, it could be anything. It's sitting by itself. You don't know if it's capital or lowercase. Like, truly, why was that allowed to happen?
Well, Washington, D.C. has lettered streets, too.
What? Really?
Mm-hmm.
So there's an I Street there as well?
There may be.
But name it AYE Street. Okay, you can't sit here and say that it's normal and acceptable that you would ever live on a street with one letter. Come on, there's no fucking way. Would you live on a street called I Street? Think about all the headaches with shipping. It'd be never ending, right?
Doesn't Palmdale have lettered streets too?
You are not shook by it.
No, I'm not.
I am. So,
hey,
there's that.
Do you remember when Keith said that Angie graduated high school early at 17, then turned 18 and went to college? I was like, nah, Keith, that's not early. That's a totally normal age to graduate. Me and my husband, we were 17. Then we turned 18 in that summer and went to college. What the hell are you talking about?
But other than that, Flav, Keith had some good responses today And there was some good stuff. And you got to listen to Talking Dateline because it was the same thing like listening to the first one with AC. It's weird to hear his normal voice when he's talking with J-Mink. It almost sounds like he's mad or something.
Hi, Keith.
How do you do? Nice to meet you, Josh.
Wow. This is starting off great right from the beginning.
Right? Because he's not doing the affectation of a news reporter guy. You got to peep it.
I don't know that I've ever heard his normal voice because I feel like even on talk shows and stuff, he's still Keith.
Yeah. I think just like the intimate nature of the pod, I suppose. But he's like low talking and stuff. But anyway, it's pretty good. You got to check it out.
He does ads on the Dateline podcast.
Yeah, I know, because I fly through them all the goddamn time.
He makes everything sound cool as hell.
Yeah.
Boring insurance commercials. I'm like, yeah, Keith, I'm in.
Yeah, he just needs to put a little extra juice on a syllable, and it's like, wow, he just said the smartest, coolest thing in the world. I feel like anything he says, if he draws it out enough and gives it that Keith twang, there's no stopping it.
Really?
Now, Kate, another cool thing about the Talking Dateline is they were saying how in the UK, cops are not allowed to lie to suspects while they're interrogating them. That's a good little piece of business right there. And I think that we should adopt. But he plays a clip with a British detective where they got to give him breaks every 2 hours. They got to let him pray.
You should only interview for 2 hours at a time, and you should take recognized breaks at meal times, prayer times, and night time.
It's pretty insane that we're allowed to lie to people in interrogations, don't you think?
Absolutely. Scotland Yard, 1 point. American cops, 0.
Oh, gotcha. This was a f***ing banger. I love this app. What a coaster it was. I was pretty floored at the end of this, that Chris Tapp had died. Like, I don't know. I mean, it's... Anyway. All right. Well, I guess that's going to do it. I'm Kurt Money.
I'm Kateline.
I'm Lester Holt. For all of us, I'm Lester Holt. Good night.
I mean, it was a passionate crime.